I wanted to start off the action from last night talking about the Mavericks Clippers game. It was the last game of the night, and I do think that this is one of the most compelling first round series that we have. I think it has a great chance to go the distance, and a lot of people were sort of, I guess, overreacting some to that first game where the Clippers were without Kawhi Leonard and they still put the whooping on the Mavericks in game one on Sunday. But last night the Mavericks bounced back in what was a real redemption game for them because, again, they kind of got punked when they first played on Sunday. The Clippers defense was just absolutely smothering them. Luka was getting extremely frustrated. You could see the emotions really getting to him. And, you know, when we get into last night's game as well, definitely was feeling the emotions, but was more controlled in them and ended up having a much better game. I know he scored 33 points on Sunday, but a lot of that was in garbage time. I thought he was much more impressive last night in a couple of ways. And really for the Mavs, when it came to their game one loss, outside of a Kyrie Irving led third quarter where he scored 20 points, they didn't have much going for them. And now fast forward to this game last night on Tuesday, the Clippers defense was still very much smothering and they didn't make anything easy. The Clips racked up 9 steals in the game, turned the Mavericks over 13 times, held the Mavericks to just 96 points, but despite that, the Mavericks were able to respond. It was clear from all of the mic'd up moments with Mavericks head coach Jason Kidd that they wanted to play a more physical game and step up to the challenge in the postseason, and they absolutely did so. This was a very physical game on both sides, which is why going into the fourth quarter it was just a 66-65 ball game. But as much as I just talked about the Clippers defense, I thought that the intensity that they showed on that defensive end, going to talk about the role players and how they stepped up in this game, and then just the shot making down the stretch. This did look like a version of a Mavericks team that a lot of people headed into the playoffs were sort of talking themselves into in terms of being a dark horse contender as they finished off the season on a really nice stretch. And now here they are headed back to Dallas with the series advantage. And it's true, just like in game one, the offense is still very reliant on Luka and Kyrie. What you see when they don't have the ball in their hands, there's not really anybody who can make shots. Now, I think there are a couple different things sort of baked into this. On one hand, you have the crowd, including Charles Barkley, who during the halftime show was talking about how he wants to see Luka be able to play off the ball a little bit more and how he's very hands-on, which is very much true, and that's something that moving forward here, I feel like for Luka to sort of take his game, I mean, he's already at an MVP caliber level, so how many more levels can he go up necessarily? But as things currently stand, I feel like that's sort of his play style, and it's the way that the Mavericks have chose to build around him, which works for the current iteration of their team, and I think they have a great chance of not just winning this series, but potentially making it to the conference finals. But, you know, as for right now, though, it is true that it is very centered around Luka and Kyrie from an offensive perspective. And, you know, again, with this late game execution, we saw, especially last year, obviously Luka and Kyrie didn't get a ton of run together, but in the instances we did see them, it was still very new. It was very clear. There were even some instances where they were trying to get each other looks too much that neither of them really stepped forward as the aggressor. But now, a year and a half later, we've seen that they are so good at playing off of one another, and the late game execution is at a much higher level. And it looked like they were possibly going to be on the ropes in this one in a defensive fight here. The Clippers were building up some momentum. They're at home. They led by 6 points in that fourth quarter. And the Mavericks responded with a 14-0 run to retake the lead, and they didn't give it up from there. what was really interesting to see for me in that final stretch of the game was the fact that Jason Kidd decided to roll with Maxi Kleber as their big man down this final stretch, because Kleber really struggled in game one. He couldn't find his perimeter shot, and the Clippers knew that. They were playing so heavily off him to double team Luka and Kyrie. Kleber wasn't good defensively, and he was kind of a wreck here, but he sort of rectified all of those things in this game where, it's not like he was any sort of a flamethrower. He knocked down 2 threes, which included a three-pointer with just over 2 minutes left, and he played the role he needed to. It was clear they were trying to look for, a defensive lineup out there that was a little bit more switchable. In terms of their big men, you had Daniel Gafford, who was dealing with an injury. He was limited in this game. Derek Lively provided some good minutes, but still just a rookie as far as, that veteran understanding of how to play out on the perimeter and not give up too much. Kleber was just the better option for the Mavericks in this instance, and I do think that the Mavericks are interesting because of the fact that, no, they don't necessarily have a superstar center anywhere on the roster, but they have 3 very viable options for different types of looks and matchups that stand out for them. But Kleber was on the court, and he was not the one that the Clippers were trying to pick on late in the game. The Clippers were trying to get Luka Doncic on the opposing ball handlers, and I thought that Luka did a really good job of holding up on the defensive side of the ball, especially considering the fact that he's asked to do so much offensively as well. And obviously, it's a game that includes both offense and defense, so I don't want to throw Luka a parade necessarily for actually, giving the defensive efforts. But I thought it was really encouraging to see, and, it looked like at times he was really tired out there, but it sounds like he's been much more serious about his conditioning during the off season. He probably still has a little bit, more to go in that department, but even still, I thought he did a really good job holding up on defense down the stretch there. We're far from 48 minutes of really good Luka defense, but he showed some flashes. I thought the backside block that he had earlier in the game when Lively had stepped up, and I believe it was Plumlee, got a wide open look under the rim, but Luka came from behind and blocked him then. There's still some bad tendency things. Again, I'm not saying he's the perfect defender, but he is making some steps to make himself a more well-rounded player. And as much as I said, what are the next levels that Luka can hit, I do feel like there are some marginal things to make him a little bit more well-rounded and take his game to the peak of what he possibly could be if he isn't already close enough to that as things currently stand. But as much as Luka and Kyrie are the initiators for this Mavericks team, I did think that the rest of the role players sort of showed up for them. They played a little bit more Josh Green in this game. I like the energy that he provides off the bench for them, specifically on the defensive side. PJ Washington, I thought that he had a great game, especially down the stretch. He had some big buckets, including a couple corner threes that went to go. I feel like Washington is one of these players, and I don't know what statistic to necessarily look for, but it feels like Washington is always getting the ball with the shot clock winding down, and he's sort of being forced into these grenades. And his percentages aren't necessarily the best in the world, but I think he definitely holds his own. Plus, the level of defense that he has provided just with the length, with the hustle, I do feel like has been a positive for them. Kleber, I already talked about, and the role that he played down the stretch there. Derek Jones Jr. also providing some solid defense as well. And the Mavericks were just able to hold off the Clippers thanks to some of the creation from Luka and Kyrie, who both got some big-time buckets in this one. And like I mentioned, the Mavericks were dealing with some injuries. Daniel Gafford dealing with a lower back injury earlier in the game. He only ends up playing 9 minutes in this game. He does return, but again, was just much more ineffective. And Tim Hardaway Jr., he exits the game in the second quarter with a sprained ankle, and he did not return. So I thought that this was a really gutsy performance, a nice statement comeback game for the Mavericks, and now they head into their games at Dallas with the series advantage. And On the other end of this game, I thought the Clippers offense looked really clunky, and the fact that it was so close while they did means that I am not ready to fully write off the Clippers by any means. I think that this is going to be one of, if not the best first round series, but the Clippers decided to bring back Kawhi Leonard last night, who was listed as questionable headed into the game, had missed 9 straight with right knee inflammation. And it seemed like he had missed a lot of time in this one, specifically in the first half. He just looked really uncomfortable, specifically on the offensive end to me. He was sort of standing around a bunch, not necessarily being an aggressor, not attacking himself. He was decent on defense. He racked up 3 steals in that first half, so not that he was a liability by any means, but it just was it was clear that he was still trying to get his groove back a little bit. I thought he looked more comfortable in the second half, specifically in that third quarter, where he was being more aggressive and getting into the paint. He had a big shot in the fourth as well, as the Clippers were trying to stage the comeback in the closing minutes there. There were some debates about whether or not the Clippers should be looking to bring back Kawhi in this one. I think that this was the right decision. Obviously, you end up losing the game, and that doesn't feel great. But I think that they are going to need Kawhi Leonard in order to win this series. The Mavericks have the star power. Kawhi Leonard can be the big-time difference maker. He's been the difference maker a handful of years ago now. But when the Clippers were facing off against a young Luka Doncic and those Mavericks teams from a handful of years ago, where in back-to-back playoffs the Clippers sent the Mavericks home. And I'm not panicking that the Clippers lost in this game. I understand them trying to bring him back at home, not in a hostile environment, sort of leave LA with that home court advantage still, and it is what it is. They end up dropping this game, but I'm not ready to write them off by any means. Like I said, some of the role players just did not have the same impact in this game too than they did over the weekend. Zubac's stat line was still solid in this one, 13 points, 12 rebounds, but he was struggling with his efficiency throughout the game. He didn't seem like he had the same impact on the interior, and I know that his points weren't that much dramatically higher in game 1, but still, it just didn't feel like he had that same sort of energy and impact in this one. Terrence Mann was really big for them in Game 1 in the absence of Kawhi Leonard. He saw his minutes dip from 39 to 21 in this game. And he wasn't particularly effective necessarily in this game anyways, but something at least to note, obviously, tied into the fact that Kawhi's playing time sort of dipped into his playing time, and you're going to prioritize Kawhi Leonard. And for this game, again, the Clippers offense was just really clunky in a lot of these instances where they shot just under 37% from the field on the night as a whole. They were 8 of 30 from 3, and like I said, you can make an argument that they were sort of lucky to be in this game anyways, despite the fact that their offense felt like for a lot of it, the Mavericks should have had, these big leads, but the Clippers were just able to hang in there for a while and up until the final minutes. So the fact that they were so competitive despite looking so bad on offense is why I'm not out on them just yet. But I think this is going to be an incredible series throughout. According to DraftKings Sportsbook, the Mavericks have retaken the series odds. They came into this series favored in terms of the series as a whole. After game 1 losing in the way that they did, the Clippers became favored, but it is now shifted back in favor of the Mavericks, where they are minus 135. So we have the next game on Friday. This is definitely one of the premier series of the first round, and I'm going to stick with my original pick in the Mavericks. Just out of, I guess, a pride argument. But I do feel like they're going to go back to Dallas. And the big thing I am going to look at is the injuries. There was even a weird instance where it seemed like Luka, off of a jump shot, was sort of dealing with something in his lower leg. But Tim Hardaway Jr., we're not sure what the status is on him going forward. I know that he wasn't a massive part of their team down the stretch of the season, but he is one of those types of players that it feels like in a home playoff game, he has some experience, and he could be somebody who gets hot from three, scores a random 20 points or so. But again, I'm going to roll with the Mavericks as we move on here, but I think this series is going to be potentially a 7-gamer, which is good because I don't know how many of those types of series we're really going to get from this first round, the way that things have started off here. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break of the show. When we come back, I want to dive into the Phoenix Suns a little bit and their loss to the Minnesota Timberwolves. So stick with us and we will be right back.